Omnipotence, they said. Remain silent in this ever-changing world, waiting for someone to finally understand you. If you have been struggling to understand Rhino, or you didn't know how to operate him just like me, or you just want to have a good understanding of him, this guide is specifically made for you. In today's guide to Rhino, I will be tackling his acquisition, his passive and abilities to a deep level, augments and where you can make use of them. Understand his mod requirements and the investment you need. Archon Shards, focus school, and some subsume choices. How to operate Rhino like I do, some recommendations, and much more. Do keep in mind that this guide is not entirely friendly for any new players, but I will try my best to cover it. If you want, I do have one that is new player friendly. Do please make use of timestamps wisely, and with that, let's begin. You can acquire Rhino from the Jackal boss fight at Fossa Venus. The materials for Rhino are cheap, only needing a total of 2 neurodes, 150 alloy plate, 250 polymer bundle, 700 circuits, 1500 ferrite, and 1200 rubido. All of these materials can be acquired immediately when you are able to grind out the parts of Rhino. Stat-wise, base Rhino has 240 armor, 370 health, 555 shields, and 0.95 sprint speed, which is 50 less armor and 0.05 less sprint speed when compared to Rhino Prime. Speaking of, as the upload time currently stands, you have missed the opportunity to obtain his Prime variant from Prime Resurgence, although I would argue it is not as impactful. Rhino Prime only provide you additional armor and sprint speed, and contrary to popular beliefs, Rhino simply does not care much about both stats. Why? I will explain it later. You mostly acquire Rhino Prime for the huge fashion upgrade. You may disagree with me, but base Rhino Prime skin is still easily one of Rhino's greatest looking skin, if not the best looking skin. The designs are simple yet essential. The detailing is just enough that it is very tasteful, and not too much that it is all over the place. For me, the design still felt incredibly timeless, on top of having one of, if not the most expressive helmets in the game. Such minor detail makes Rhino feel alive, as if he is staring at you, observing your actions. Anyways, what I mean is that you can get away perfectly fine with base Rhino. Rhino Prime isn't that much of an actual upgrade, but if you wish to obtain his Prime variant, I won't stop you either. Rhino's passive is basically heavy impact as a mod, but with some of the most inconsistent knockdowns ever. Upon landing with a great speed, you will trigger a base 6 meter shockwave that knocks enemy down, opening them up to ground finishers. It scales with your downwards momentum, which can go as high as 12 meter in most cases. And unlike all passives in this game, this is stackable with heavy impact mod. Not only the quote-unquote inconsistency is alleviated, the range is now 12 meter at base, and can go as far as 24 meters, which is quite good for a passive. And if you have enough parkour velocity, say around 75% or more via Arcane Consequence and a parkour velocity mod, you can actually jump and downwards bullet jump to trigger his passive, bypassing the need of falling. Although this can be done better when you jump a bit after you bullet jump downwards, forcing you to gain immense height and reduce the need of parkour velocity from 75% to around 30%, albeit some timing is required. The more parkour velocity you have, say 52.5% via Praedos plus 1 Tauforge Archon Shard, the faster you can trigger his passive. Do keep in mind that you can also cast Rhino Stomp to prolong the knockdown period for the remainder of Rhino Stomp's duration, a huge leeway for ground finishers. Although this has a strict line of sight check like slam attacks, but it costing no energy to have access to knockdown does open up some synergy for Rhino. Arcanes that requires melee finisher such as melee crescendo can be stacked easily without dedicating a focus skill or put his energy economy at risk through excessive piercing roll abuse. And if you somehow want to make use of this passive, you could be like me, trying to DPS with it. With a niche subsume such as Mark for Death, you can force set ground finisher to nuke if you pair this up with a dedicated melee. Although it is not that good or widely applicable, but it is still something that his passive is capable to contribute. Or you can equip Heavy Impact while pairing it with Jade Stars, turning this into the most unserious DPS setup ever, as Rhino's passive is also a damage source, thus eligible to trigger Jade Stars, utilizing the technique that I previously demonstrated. And yeah, that's pretty much for his passive. Let's talk about his abilities, shall we? Rhino Charge is Rhino's first ability, which is easily the most misunderstood and underutilized ability in this game. On cast, Rhino charges with a speed of 48 meters per second and a dash distance of 12 meters, dealing 650 impact damage to enemies that comes in contact with the 2 meter radius around him. This also has a combo multiplier system, where you can chain the cast to gain additional benefit, as the graph currently demonstrates. On the second cast, you gain 2 times damage, 1.25 times dash range, and 0.5 times energy cost. On the third cast and afterwards, you gain 4 times damage, 1.5 times dash range, and 0.25 times energy cost. If you look closely, all these buffs are also multiplicative to their respective category, which is definitely nice. Rhino Charge is also able to apply a blast proc when Iron Skin is active, while gaining an additional 2 times damage to enemies under the effects of Rhino Stomp. So, why is it misunderstood then? It is hard to appreciate Rhino Charge when there is no one there to tell you why it is actually great, and today I'ma show you. Have you heard of Rhino Charge bullet jump cancelling? It is very common that people assume that Rhino Charge is being used in this way, where you just press the button and no further interaction. But see how I use Rhino Charge. I'm sure that you can tell the difference. You may also realize that I'm constantly cancelling the animation of bullet jump with a Rhino Charge cast, and my feet is always off the ground. This turns Rhino from one of the slower frames to easily one of the fastest in your day-to-day missions. An experienced Rhino player can zoom past tile sets like it's nothing, like Rhino is actually a speed frame instead of the supposedly heavy moving bastion. This is due to how Rhino Charge interacts with bullet jump. As you can tell, Rhino Charge preserves all the distance of bullet jump while allowing you to dash at a speed of 48 meters per second, while retaining all the current airborne momentum instead of stopping abruptly. This makes parkour velocity an indirect increase to Rhino Charge, which is easily sourceable through Praedos or Archon Shards. Not to mention that Rhino Charge is comically cheap to cast. Even at 45% efficiency, Rhino Charge can go as low as costing 9.6875 energy per cast, which makes moving around not something very expensive to maintain. Rhino Charge is also incredibly easy to invest around. You only need some casting speed, parkour velocity, and a tiny bit of range and duration, where 3 out of 4 are demanded by other parts of his kit too, which leaves you only needing to source parkour velocity, and that's pretty much you need. This allows Rhino to shift his focus to other part of his kit instead of dedicating many mod slots just to make the greatest use of Rhino Charge, something that lots of speedframe actually struggles to keep a balance around. Method-wise, all you need to do is simply bullet jump and then Rhino Charge, rinse and repeat. If the tile set is wide and you are high on air, keep spamming Rhino Charge until you reach the end of it. It requires a decent amount of precision and some practice to get used to, but when you do, you will unlock yourself an ability that is one of the fastest in your day-to-day mission. This is why I claim that sprint speed increase on Rhino Prime does not matter much, simply because that Rhino Charge does not give a damn about it at all. But I am not done yet. While Rhino Charge is very capable for a speed tool, how about its damage potential? People always assume that Rhino Charge deals basically no damage, and you know what? They are wrong. Please, allow me. I suppose that many of you haven't seen this video before, but in short, it is very easy to make Rhino Charge nuke, especially when blast proc is a thing. When you have both raw and sickening pulse together, primers and the combo multiplier, you are capable of dealing millions of damage. Like Rhino Charge isn't just an ability with 650 base damage. It's even crazier when you make use of the combo multiplier, dealing several damage instances into the 10 millions to all group enemies. You can also pair this with both Psyotid and Robots, and you can basically forgo priming and still hit some diabolical numbers. In short, it's not that Rhino Charge cannot nuke, it's just that you need to understand how to make use of blast procs to the max. And when you do grasp the power of that singular blast proc, that is when the door truly opens up. Yes, this is not as viable as other Rhino builds, but you cannot deny that it is still quite effective and capable of dealing great damage. And that's all for Rhino Charge. With this section, I hope that you can see that Rhino Charge is way more than what meets the eye. As for the augment, it will be discussed in the augment section later. But for now, as much as Rhino Charge is a phenomenal ability, it is still easily the weakest ability in Rhino's kit. It just doesn't hold itself against the trio of genuine power creep, starting with Iron Skin. Iron Skin is Rhino's second ability, and it is Rhino's most well-known ability. On cast, Rhino is invulnerable for 3 seconds, absorbing any sort of damage taken in this period while disabled blocking. And after that, the value is finalized and turned into Overguard, where blocking will resume its function. It should be known that Rhino also taunts enemy around 20 meters of him on cast, overriding all threat level increased abilities except Resonator and Defense Objective from Shadowgraph, while being the first ever warframe that draws aggro to themselves, with the second one being Styanax. Anyways, the way that Iron Skin scales is as follows: 1200 plus total armor value times 2.5 times ability strength, and after that is where enemy damage is being added. A base Rhino with no mod will net you 1800 Overguard, while Rhino Prime will net you 1925 Overguard. With 200 strength and steel fiber on both Rhino and Rhino Prime, Rhino will have an Iron Skin value of 4800 as the math indicates, while Rhino Prime will have 5300, also proven by math. But wait, Stick, didn't you say that Rhino does not care about more base armor at all? Iron Skin clearly scales with armor, so why do you say that it doesn't matter? Technically, Yes, armor does matter for Iron Skin, but how about we take a peek at the scaling formula again? You see the plus enemy damage over there? That's the actual real scaling of Iron Skin. You can basically throw away the remainder of the formula and Iron Skin will still work at peak efficiency, thus deleting the need of any armor values or strength. I can prove this to you by taking a base Rhino with 0 mods. As you can see, even at such modding condition, I still gain easy amounts of Iron Skin without much effort, just to show you the power of enemy damage scaling. The true power of Iron Skin does not come from modding for it, but to interact with your enemies. Iron Skin is the only primary survivability tool in this game that requires 0 mod investment from you, because all you need to learn is just one thing and one thing only. In Warframe, it is rare to have an ability that requires the player to actively engage with the game itself, and none go as far as the delicate performance that Rhino did with his enemies. Due to enemy damage and Iron Skin had a ratio of 1:1. Understand how to make the absorbed portion of yours last much longer is a consistent and conscious effort, with the primary, most straightforward method such as not letting enemies hit you at all. Rhino Stomp exists for a clear reason, even more so with its augment reinforcing Stomp. This is his main way of maintaining Iron Skin, while being the sharpest double-edged sword. Other methods such as movement is just as crucial. Not standing still and always keep yourself moving will passively increase Iron Skin's longevity by a lot, and killing them as soon as possible also makes them shoot less, which Raw will always aid him in such matter. There's also methods like blocking. This is especially important when you are making use a melee. The ability to block damage coming from a set angle is not something you can ignore for no reason, And then rolling. Such a simple moveset, yet hiding something no one seems to be making use of. Did you know that if you are rolling, you only take 25% of the intended damage? And this also applies to Overguard. Yes, it actually applies. That Blitz Eximus attack that keeps one tapping Iron Skin? Oh no! How about you just roll through it? See what I mean now? There are so many methods to prolong Iron Skin, but for now, I will leave it as is. Since I'm talking about the interaction around Iron Skin, aka Overguard now, this is the perfect segue to... Despite transitioning from Ferrite armor to Overguard, there's nothing much really changed for Iron Skin. Iron Skin still provide you complete status immunity and negative effects from all disruption conduits, even for something like the minus 50% speed from Hobble Dragon Key. But with Overguard, 2 new things are added. First is the 0.5 second Overguard gate. The second is the fact that you can now proc arcanes with quote-unquote on damage condition. Overguard also cannot benefit from damage reduction sources like adaptation, which doesn't really change much for Rhino. Although damage redirection does benefit Overguard, do please keep this in mind. Despite Overguard cannot benefit from any sort of damage reduction, it doesn't exclude certain synergy from working in Overguard's favor, which is the most apparent on Rhino due to Iron Skin's infinite scaling. But before I talk about them, there is something that I need to address first. Remember that I said that now Iron Skin had access to a 0.5 second invulnerability gate when Iron Skin goes down? Welcome to the world of... Iron Skin's 0.5 second steam through is a mechanic where you make use of the invulnerability gate to prevent taking any sort of damage to shields by slotting in a specific amount of casting speed or above, mashing the ability button before it ends. Yeah, now you know why I said that casting speed is also demanded by other part of his kit. This mechanic is incredibly useful when you are about to rebuild a new Iron Skin. It only needs a casting speed as low as 37.5% to work, which is exactly the amount that a Tau Forge Ember Archon Shard gives. And yeah, With that out of the way, it is time that we all proceed to Previously, I already stated that rolling briefly provides Iron Skin a 75% damage reduction, and there are 3 more that I would like to point out. Omamori, Arcane Persistence, and an augment of Rhino, which I will be keeping it a secret for now. Starting with Omamori, it is not apparent why Omamori is good on Rhino, but when you recall what I said before, block as a stat works great on Rhino and is able to mitigate damage from a set angle. Omamori, however, has a 360-degree block angle that has a 50% chance to block all sorts of attack, which is active at all times. And due to Overguard will not consume any charges, this ability will last astronomically long, to a point that you can cast this ability once, and that's all for the rest of the mission. Arcane Persistence, for some reason, is actually very similar to Omamori when it comes to interacting with Overguard. I'm sure that most of you have definitely seen this video of mine before, though if you want the TLDW, it is as follows. Arcane Persistence will force a single instance of damage to be 500 for every 1 second, similar to the charges from Omamori. And then there's no and then. Nah, just kidding. There are a few methods of gaining great amounts of Iron Skin. Either you get them through focus fire from a group of enemies, Blitz Eximus, Malice Acolyte Bubble, or the most well-known of them all, Jade-like Eximus. It is most likely you to be doing this with either groups of enemies, or Jade-like when levels are not into the thousands. Malice Acolyte is not as good as the other choices here, and relying strictly on Blitz Eximus is very risky if you are not incredibly experienced with its attack pattern. And if you opt for the augment just for this, you better off just use other methods. Anyways, for a group of enemies, once you located one, you would want to hold onto your Iron Skin cast first if you don't have one casted, which you would want yourself to be purposefully surrounded by them, aka jumping into the most dense part of that group. And remember, stay mostly still while the process is going on. Do not waste it. I have seen many rhinos make this mistake when they waste the 3-second golden period by not standing still for even a short while. Some even panic cast Rhino Stomp the moment Iron Skin drops, as shown. Please don't do any of these. Obviously, it will take you some time to finally get the hang of this method as it requires a significant amount of experience, but once you do, you are basically unkillable unless you make some dumb mistakes. If you choose to rely on Jade-like instead, it is much easier than you think. With Iron Skin 0.5 seconds steam through in mind, it is incredibly easy to set up and net an overwhelmingly lots of Iron Skin while being absolutely safe while doing so, as shown. Also, bringing pets that don't CC enemies abruptly or uncontrollably will be very beneficial, simply because they tend to not ruin your setup, something like a Death Cube, Nautilus, Panzer Vorpal, and so on. And that's all. With Iron Skin out of the way, it is time for me to talk about his next ability, one that all of you are incredibly familiar with. Roar is Rhino's third ability, and I am sure that this ability does not need much introduction at all. When in doubt, you and I will simply slap Roar on any other frames, even it is with reduced effectiveness, even if it may not be the BIS. Roar is just that good of an ability, and more so on Rhino. Not just because that Roar is in its full effect on Rhino, but for a multitude of reasons, which I will cover all of them later throughout this video. Anyways, Roar gives him and all sorts of allies a base 50% damage increase, lasts for a base 30 seconds. This applies to almost anyone that is considered as an ally, for example, companions, summon allies such as on-call crewmates, or any of the specters you summon. Raw is considered as a universal faction damage increase, additive to faction mods, damage blessing, and summoner's wrath. It also applies to faction that doesn't have a faction damage mod, like acolytes or warframe abilities that deals any sort of damage, or mods that deal set amount of damage. Raw can also apply to it, most famously being acid shells or any other similar mods. Do keep in mind that Raw is not applicable on something that is considered as an object and uses object health, most notably crates around the map. But Raw isn't just known for its applicability, but also for its quote-unquote dipping, commonly being double dip when DOT is considered, where Raw will apply itself twice. But is double dip all he got? Of course not. It wouldn't be Rhino without something out of the ordinary. Please, allow me to reveal you the world where Raw no longer acts ordinarily. Past the world of double dipping, there are triple, quadruple, and the quote-unquote theoretically infinite dip. For things such as triple dip, they are the most common on any extra hits that has a DOT. Sources such as hit magazine from recon effects, primary debilitate, melee influence, DOT from mark for death, and much more. This means that Raw apply its value for 3 times. One on the direct hit, one on the extra hit that spawns from it, and one on the DOT that comes from extra hit. The same rule also applies to quadruple dip. For example, subsume thermal thunder with a hit primer and a hit plus cold caps, and breach surge. While breach surge itself only applies Raw once, but if you use something that already dips 3 times, breach surge is technically the 4th dip in this case. And there's the technically infinite dip. Technically infinite dip means that Raw will always apply itself every time when something is triggered, most famously being melee afflictions, contagious bond, Ruvox, and thermal thunder on Gauss. In Warframe, the damage buff that is considered overpowered by many tends to have some weird synergy that elevates them to a new level. But even if this is considered, Raw is still home to the highest potential damage for one exact reason: Infinite cannot be outscaled. Many such buffs are linear at nature, but Raw is exponential. Once the condition is met, there is nothing that can stop Raw from infinitely apply itself and cascade to a point that no damage increase in this game will come close to Raw, even Subsume Raw. At 400% strength, the difference between a 120% Raw and 200% Raw, even if they both only dip 10 times, is 2,655 times versus 59,049 times. This is the power of technically infinite dip, and why pet DPS Rhino is a crime to humanity for this exact reason. You can print damage cap on every single enemy without trying, and that is why I never show this to anyone nor play it myself. It is just that game breaking, but regardless, others will do it anyway. Well, that's all for this one. Despite having so many synergy that you can easily lose count of it, they mostly follow the same rule and the same pathway down the road. I will cover some synergies later in the Helmet choices section, but for now, let's move on to Rhino's final ability. Storms with force sufficient to disrupt time. You know what? I'm not going to question that. Rhino will stomp the ground and puts enemies around 25 meters of him in stasis. Lasts for a base 8 seconds. Once the duration is over, they will try to get up before resume shooting at you, which tends to last a short few seconds. This has no line of sight checks. I repeat, no line of sight checks. And also has an innate meter of 5, where it deals additional damage with 4 off, and is able to break objects with this inner circle. You can think of this as quote-unquote Radio Blast, the ability that gets replaced by Raw and merged itself with Rhino Stomp in update 8.3. Do keep in mind that the duration of Rhino Stomp is applied individually to each enemy, not the duration timer on the ability icon. Knockdown, ragdoll, and lifted status effect from any sources will override Rhino Stomp's effect. And when knockdown is applied, only the slow will go through, thus this weird looking position that they are in. The cast order doesn't matter, the slow will always be maintained, which also prolongs the ground finisher window in the meantime. Obviously, this ability cannot affect enemies with Overguard or enemies with a health bar on screen with a huge asterisk, that being Star Chart bosses and acolytes, notably Violence, or certain units like Demolishers from Disruption missions or Necromax. Yes, Rhino have a way to say F you to Violence. When you specifically mod for this ability past the usual 145 range, it can go as far as shutting down multiple tile sets at once, while get to enjoy the nuke slot in the meantime. You simply don't need any of the usual picks for CC, because Rhino is already the strongest among all of them. Yes, the warframe who has the highest potential damage output in this game, the guy who survived with complete ease, is somehow the strongest in a category he isn't really the most focused on. Using Rhino Stomp with 265 range can make you understand why Overguard must be a thing. When you have the opportunity to turn enemy off while wiping tile sets clean, it doesn't seem like enemies have a bit of chance to fight back at all, you know. Just don't fall asleep while you are doing so. It simply does not matter that it costs 100 base energy, because we have so many methods of solving that. The overall efficacy means everything. It is an ability that is full circular, no line of sight, immediate with its almost unnoticeable travel speed, with a phenomenal fixed slow percent, having twice the slow strength of a max strength Gloom. Anyways, make sure to always chain your Rhino Stomp properly. When the duration is up, don't immediately press it, but to wait for a short while, then you press it again. Rhino Stomp can also be used to break cameras on spy missions. Not like it's any useful, but it's something so good to know. Rhino Stomp isn't a difficult to understand ability or have many weird interaction, and outside of focus cases, Rhino Stomp is the primary method of prolonging Iron Skin, even more so with Reinforcing Stomp. More on that later. It is also an insanely cheap ability to invest into, at most needing a stretch mod plus a bit of duration to already be better than almost all of the abilities in set category, or you can just keep the neutral range for many subsume builds, and make this the second ability in Rhino's kit that doesn't need any focus modding outside of Reinforcing Stomp. And that is all for Rhino's abilities actually. With that, it is time for me to finally talk about his augments. Like many other older frames, Rhino has 4 augments: Ironclad Charge, Iron Shrapnel, Piercing Roar, and Reinforcing Stomp. All Rhino's augment can be purchased from New Local or the parent sequence when rank 5 is reached, costing 25k standing for each augment. With that out of the way, may we start. Ironclad Charge is an augment for Rhino Charge. On contact with an enemy, you will gain 50% armor rating for 10 seconds, scaling with strength and duration, and is a final multiplier to your armor value. To prove this, I have modded Rhino with Steel Fiber, and I will hit one enemy with Rhino Charge, and I will get 3k Iron Skin, with the math below proving this conclusion. Wow, multiplicative armor buff, the first ever in this game even. And it is kind of inconsequential for Rhino in the long run. As I said before in this video, Rhino does not care about armor much, even if Iron Skin scales with it. Enemy damage is far too superior, and I haven't even addressed the Jade Light in the room. Speaking of the devil, Jade Light has basically replaced this augment's only purpose. You can be a Rhino with 0 mods and still have millions of Overguard, enough to sleep through all the intended content in this game already. Don't get me wrong, you can make Rhino a health tank frame with this. Yes, you are not hearing this wrong. This is a health tank Rhino. when you specifically push Rhino towards health tanking. Yes, Rhino is actually insane at it due to him able to generate the highest amount of armor known in this game. Piercing Raw forcing 80% damage reduction plus adaptation, but still, there's no reason for you to do so when Iron Skin already exists. And even so, you better off just survive only through Rhino Stomp plus shield gating. In a vacuum, Ironclad Charge is incredible, but when the big picture is considered, Ironclad Charge managed to find no place in Rhino's kit, simply because armor just doesn't interact with enemy damage scaling, aka the far more superior method. Next one on the list, however, Iron Shrapnel is the augment for Iron Skin. Iron Shrapnel allows Rhino to uncast his Iron Skin and deal the remainder of it as puncture damage to enemies around base 8 meters, with a linear damage fall-off. The damaging wave does not have line of sight checks, do please keep this in mind. Before we get into the use case of it, I must clear a specific idea about this augment first. You do not use this augment simply for recast. Uncast Iron Skin just to get a quote-unquote new Iron Skin is some of the most stupid thing you can do on Rhino. Anyways, with a proper setup, you can turn this augment into a good DPS tool without enemy damage scaling. Though you can absolutely bring this to level cap cascade and kill Traxxas with it, nobody is stopping you. I already have a video about this exact build. If you want to have fun with it, feel free to check out. There's also another niche use case for this augment, and it is to utilize the incredible aggro pulling strength of Iron Skin. By recasting this ability, you can force enemies that are attacking the objective to immediately turn towards you, and no enemies will ever attempt to target the defense objective, which is pretty great to have, though not very practical these days. While Iron Shrapnel isn't that widely applicable when not properly set up or around level cap, it is still a perfectly serviceable augment that honestly could use a bit more love, but I digress. There's also an operator arcane called Magus Destruct, where it allows each Void Dash hit on an enemy to make them 65% more vulnerable to puncture damage, with no noticeable limit to the stacking. If you stack this arcane enough on a single enemy on top of priming plus buffs like Raw, you will get some absolutely ridiculous damage before the real scaling kicks in. And with that, it leaves us with the two S tier augments, the must try or must have on Rhino, with the first being Piercing Raw. Piercing Raw is an augment designated for Raw, and you gain a 40% ability range increase on equip, specifically for Raw itself. On cast, Rhino will apply 5 puncture procs to enemies who is 25 meters around him while knocking them down, opening them up to finishers. It also has no line of sight attached to it, and you can cast as much Raw as you wish with this augment. Once again, the last thing you want from this augment is actually recast. If we take a look at what puncture procs provide, it states that it will weaken the enemy and reduce their damage by 40%, increase by 10% for each stack, up to 80% at 5 puncture procs. You also gain plus 5% crit chance on direct hits for each stack of puncture procs. The status itself lasts 10 seconds individually, but for Piercing Raw, the status duration is scalable with ability duration. Can you see where I am going? This means that enemies actually deal 80% less damage to me when they are affected by puncture procs, effectively giving Iron Skin a 5 times EHP, one of the 2 main reasons why you make use of Piercing Raw on Rhino. And you can see just how much slower the Iron Skin drops after I cast Raw. Giving a flat plus 25% crit chance immediately also means that Rhino can allow low base crit weapons to crit much better, for example, Phantasma. It also helps weapons that generally aren't reaching 100% crit to get crit hits more often than without any puncture procs, and not to mention the additional status procs that helps with CO, especially for multi-CO weapons. Even for weapons that has a higher crit chance, this is still a notable increase, and nice for weapons that does not have innate puncture. This even applies to converted allies. Their weapons can also benefit from the increased crit chance, which is especially important since their weapons cannot be modded with anything you wish. Unfortunately, any radio attack of abilities does not benefit from the increased crit chance from puncture procs, not even for abilities that are known to be quote-unquote coded as weapons. That is all for Piercing Roar. Just like Rhino Stomp, you do not want to cast this ability at the wrong time because it also ruins the 3 seconds of Iron Skin when improperly used, or anything that interacts with enemy damage. So do please be mindful when you make use of said augment. Anyways, shall we review the final augment of Rhino? Reinforcing Stomp is the augment that Rhino Stomp gets, and the idea is exceptionally simple. Striking enemies with Rhino Stomp recovers 4% of Iron Skin's health, which cannot be altered by strength. Reinforcing Stomp cannot be triggered when they are affected by Rhino Stomp, which means when Rhino Stomp's tumbling effect cannot be applied or is cancelled, Reinforcing Stomp will trigger on every single button press, regardless of anything. The easiest way to make sense of this is by thinking it as each hit from Rhino Stomp increase the number on the ability icon of Iron Skin by 4, up until you hit 100, the simplest yet the undisputed strongest augment of Rhino. And with that, this concludes the section for Rhino's augments, and also all the explaining. Now, let's talk about how to build Rhino. You thought I would just flash you a mod screen that has the complete build. I could do that and immediately give what you asked for, but by doing so, you will know basically nothing. It is better for you to understand the thought process behind each mod choices, so that you can craft the build that you find the most comfortable, but I digress. Rhino is a frame that requires very little investment from the player. It is very easy for Rhino to hit a soft cap in terms of power increase, as the dash speed of Rhino Charge, invulnerability duration and enemy damage scaling strength on Iron Skin, and the slow percentage of Rhino Stomp all are fixed stats. All abilities of Rhino also have incredible base range values, like Rhino Stomp, Roar and Piercing Roar's effect range, and the dash distance of Rhino Charge. With Rhino Charge bullet jump cancel, you don't necessarily need range values past 145, aka 1 stretch mod. You don't need much duration as well. Rhino Stomp and Rhino Charge don't ask much for it, so does Roar with its incredible base 30-second duration. 155 duration is all you need at most. You can choose to go past that a bit if you like, or settle with only 127.5% duration, even 102.5% on him without prime continuity, which may be less comfortable to play around. And with that, only 3 key increases are left: parkour velocity, casting speed, and ability strength. Parkour velocity can be easily sourced through Kratos and Archon Shards, but should you not get too much of it, anything just below 60% will provide you the best cost effectiveness, reachable with one more Forge Ember Shard for a total of 52.5% when Kratos is considered. Casting speed is as easy as natural talent, although getting more is always better. But casting speed as low as 37.5% is enough for you to make use of Iron Skin's 0.5 second zoom through. Having at least 50% casting speed or above is always nice. Thus, why I always bring Madurai Focus School with me. Now, if we apply everything we just learned, this is how the build will look like. Range, duration, casting speed, and parkour velocity. And all it left is just the need of strength and energy economy. This puts Rhino in a situation that only a few will suffer from. There are a lot of frames that suffers from needing more than 8 mod slots. Rhino, however, when you understand why he only needs to operate at peak efficiency, suffers from having too much mod slot. Anyways, opting for both flow and any sort of energy regeneration method such as streamline or equilibrium should suffice for energy economy before considering negative efficiency. It is advised to spend only 2 mod slots for strength modding, aka transient fortitude and intensify, or if you can afford an Umbro forma, Umbro intensify is a direct upgrade to such. You could choose to replace transient fortitude with blind rage instead, though you may need to use equilibrium instead to counter the increased energy costs. The last mod slot should dedicate to one augment of Rhino, and it is most likely to be reinforcing Stomp. Aura wise, if you can afford a growing power, slot it in immediately. Rhino doesn't need any other aura mods, unless you talk about specific setups, where both corrosive projection or mecha and power may see a use. With all of that, this is the complete build you will be looking at before Arcane's Focus School and Archon Shards. This build is immediately available to many of you, even for players that doesn't have many resources at hand. You can also pair this with Focus School such as Madurai to give you another 50% casting speed and 40% ability strength, which should net you 125% roll with Transient Fortitude plus Intensify or 132% with Umbro Intensify instead. If you choose Blind Rage over Transient Fortitude, you should be looking at 147% roll or 154% roll with Umbro Intensify. As for Arcanes, there are a few notable picks. Strength-wise, your usual mode augmented or mode vigor should be your go-to. Duration-wise, depend on your personal preference. Both mode efficiency and arcane concentration is perfect for such method. Energy-wise, I would recommend Arcane Steadfast instead when Rhino Charge is around. Rhino Charge is incredibly cheap to cast, especially when the combo builds up. You can trigger it consistently with relatively low cost. Especially for neutral efficiency Rhino, you can get away with just Arcane Steadfast alone, and you are able to replace Energy Nexus with other mods that you may want. Opting for Arcanes that buffs weapon speed is also great. Rhino doesn't have strong demand over many Arcanes, so having one slot dedicated to allow the weapon to deal more damage through more fire rate is definitely a go-to. Now, let's talk about outsourcing. Archon Shards are something that introduced itself since 2023 and has since introduced 3 more types of Archon Shards when Whispers in the War dropped. For Rhino, 3 of the original shards has their use, but Ember Archon Shard is what Rhino favors the most, the second being Crimson, the third being Azure. 4 out of 5 stats from Ember Archon Shard is what Rhino would generally opt for, especially casting speed. 37.5% is the exact value for Iron Skin 0.5 seconds in through to work flawlessly. And outsourcing parkour velocity allows you to replace mobilize with preparation, the best QOL mod you could ever put on a subsumeless Rhino. Finally, energy op effectiveness also allows you to free up more mod slots as you already had that covered. Crimson Shard wise, it is more so a power increase, ability strength and ability duration are less required, and the rest is pretty specific and subject to personal preferences. A good shot nonetheless, but not as mandatory. Azure Shard, however, you only benefit from one singular stat, 2 if specific setups are involved. Rhino and Rhino Prime boast the game's lowest max energy known in this game, and although that is not good, but due to him not really casting abilities as much, it affects him way less than it should. But you could still put in one Azure Shard to allow more leeways. As for the other shards, they are more specialized, and it is not something that Rhino really cares about all the time. Anyways, as for your focus school, it will always be Madurai. as it provides Rhino the buffs that he generally favors. With everything considered, this is how I will build my Rhino. I prefer to have 87.5% ready at all times, so that casting Rhino Stomp, Rhino Charge is pretty much seamless, even more so with Madurai. Pet wise, Rhino doesn't really ask for anything else when it is not for DPS. Death Cube is nice for energy economy. Panzer Vapor for viral priming and help trigger equilibrium. Or Sly Vapor to help you to maintain Iron Skin better when you are moving around. Obviously, there are many picks you can go. Just remember that you don't pick a pet that CCs enemies uncontrollably all the time through their attacks, as they tend to ruin the 3 seconds of Iron Skin. And with that, any recommended weapon picks with Rhino? Unfortunately, not really. It's not that Rhino doesn't have any. It's that almost every weapon can be a dedicated pick for Rhino. This category is way too vast, and it will be impossible for me to cover and still keep this guide concise and not yet about something for over a few hours. I would like you to try out any picks that you find interesting and explore it yourself. Anyways, there are still notable picks such as Reconifax, simply because of the hit magazine extra hit, and if you understand extra hit that has a DOT, it's by default triple dip with roll. Yeah, that's it. Utility picks such as Praedos for the plus 30% parkour velocity is insanely valuable, as Rhino Charge also indirectly benefit from it. Speaking of, Grimoire or Velox with Velox Conclusion are some standard utility tools that Rhino could make use of, although not mandatory at all. And with that, we have now reached the tail end of this section. Before we move on to the next section of this guide, let's address some questions that I previously left out. In terms of armor modding, while yes, I have clearly stated that armor modding isn't needed on Rhino, but when you are starting out as a new player, where Iron Skin is still not strong in its base value, it is still advised to mod for some armor to push the values up to a point that it gets comfy for you. Once you have endgame builds, that's when you don't need to mod for any armor, simply because the non-enemy damage part of Iron Skin still scales with strength. And if you are not playing Steel Path, that amount of base value, say 5k to 6k, is enough to last for a long time. Once you go into Steel Path, all you need is as simple as enemy damage, and armor hardly matters anymore. Sure, you can still mod for it, but it is better to opt for other things that benefits Rhino more, in my opinion. Speaking of enemy damage, when I post a video regarding level cap, there will always be people asking me about how do you get this much Overguard on Rhino. The answer is as simple as Rhino having enemy damage as a form of scaling. The harder the enemy hits, the more Iron Skin Rhino will have. As simple as that. Now that we have talked about his skills, his modding, focus school, pet recommendations, and much more, I would like to tell you how to play Rhino first before we jump into the build showcases. Rhino is a frame that is very easy to play, and that is the reason why he is picked as the second frame for a new player. But to be actually insane on Rhino is basically just the sheer knowledge and some skill gap. The core thing you must remember is that Iron Skin should not be casted immediately when you enter a mission, unless you are playing at levels below 100 or you are very confident. Make sure to always identify a suitable crowd for Iron Skin first, before you do anything. This gets better if you are able to understand the attack patterns of certain enemies, how they behave, etc. will always be very crucial to your success. Overall, Iron Skin is a game about understanding enemy damage, and solely relying on Jade Light can lead you to failing miserably when setup is not around. or outmatched due to enemy damage scaling. Raw, however, is much easier to understand. Raw should be a skill that you keep permanently active, as it is your form of huge damage increase, especially that Rhino is mostly a weapons platform frame. If you are traversing around, do please make great use of Rhino Charge. Techniques such as bullet jump into continuous Rhino Charge and aim yourself properly to get through narrow tile sets, blah blah blah. And lastly, Rhino Stomp is utilized to ask those enemies to stand still while you are nuking with weapons. Recharge your Iron Skin via reinforcing Stomp, and to make Acolytes, Demolish, Necromax much less threatening. And that's it. You don't need rocket science to get a hang of Rhino. But what separates you and basically just me is just the knowledge and experience that you obtain slowly as you keep playing him, and thus the existence of this guy. Undeniably, there are tons of minor details about enemy that you will eventually learn and understand. Position, enemy line of sight, etc. But once you play enough, you will get incredibly familiar with them to a point that it becomes second nature. This is the part where I must give you a disclaimer. I am not going to cover every single build of Rhino I had. Not that I want to gatekeep, but Rhino simply had too many builds that I need to cover. I have 12 Rhino Primes, and 10 of these are with all 6 configs unlocked. One of them is 5, and one of them has 3 builds in it. The video will be way too long if I cover all of them. Thus, only a few builds will be showcased today. One is my daily driver, one is nuke, one is for melee, one is for support, and one is for defensive missions. But before we start, here are some honorable mentions. First on the list is Mark for Death Rhino. Introduction aside, what makes MFD/M4D Rhino unique is that Raw simply did 3 times, as demonstrated. Pairing this with weapons such as bows and snipers, for example, Paris Prime Incarnate, will turn M4D into a very capable AoE tool. Second on the list is Pyrotechnics Rhino, a different version of Thermal Thunder, better in some way, while worse in some. What is also cool is that Arcane Arachnid's buff is applicable, giving it a great boost that also removes the need of Hit Inherit to succeed. Like Thermal Thunder, it is just a great ability to try out on Rhino, although not as widely applicable as Thermal Thunder, thus why it is in the honorable mentions. And lastly, Tempest Barrage Rhino. This is probably the closest you can get to a generically good gun buffing setup, especially when you are able to equip the Viral Tempest augment. Overall, there's nothing much to add about this setup. It is exceptional not just for gun buffing via corrosive viral priming. Raw can also force it to be a very capable DPS tool, which open it up for some DPS build if you are not vibing with guns today. The first one is Subsumeless Rhino, my daily driver. Yes, out of all the subsume choices that Rhino can utilize, even as the most compatible frame with Helminth, a Helminth-less Rhino is still my daily driver. It is like the bell curve meme, where I just return back to base kit Rhino as I am now incredibly experienced with Rhino. But that doesn't mean I don't use anything, it's just that I will always fall back to this exact choice. This also serves as the go-to for my gun buffing build when buffing is not specifically demanded. I could have included a general gun buffing build for Rhino, but unfortunately, I can't possibly provide you a build that covers everything, even the likes of Nourish Rhino. Subsumeless Rhino is just a very chill, very comfy setup for me. I don't really need anything else when I'm just chilling or doing some day-to-day grinding. There is hardly any need for me to maximize anything. The second build on the list is Thermal Thunder Rhino, or what I like to call as Plate Ringer Rhino. Only the OGs remember that Subsume Thermal Thunder on Rhino is truly the most broken thing to have in this game due to you slapping in 2 infinites onto a muscular guy. But even without that, Thermal Thunder Rhino is still one of the most insane nuke due to the fact that Raw still dips crazily with it, and unlike Gauss, you can spam hit as much as you like. When specifically paired with Hit Inherit Primer, you can deal some damage that allows Rhino to just be a phenomenal nuke frame without even being one in the first place. As for the build, there are 2 variations. In ESO, you would want to take off Reinforcing Stomp for the maximum range and opt for 45% efficiency. But when you are playing SP, Reinforcing Stomp is still a must-have on Rhino, and range maxing isn't that beneficial due to hit inherit setups, and neutral efficiency is highly preferred over negative efficiency. Speaking of ESO, how can we not talk about a build that makes Rhino one of the best supports in this game? Okay, so who thought that giving Rhino the ability to strength buff himself while giving insane amounts of energy at the same time is cool? You will see this in Meta RB, but most of the time it will be in ESO, which makes the nuke frames to have the best time of their life. Even for those who just want to have their weapons level, they will still kill enemies much faster than usual. Not to mention that you can double the strength buff with Arbuset, so you are actually looking at a strength buff that not even a 600% strength Jade can reach. And if you pair it with a Nidus Spectre, you will get some crazy raw percentage, more so with a Nidus teammate. Bright Bored Rhino is a very crazy build choice that I highly recommend you trying out. As for the next build, if we talk about melee buffing Rhino, how can I not address the pinnacle of slot, that is melee influence Rhino is slot. That's it. Trust me, you can do this from the likes of base steel path to even level cap, and nothing about this build will change. There's nothing really I can say about this build of Rhino, outside of the fact that melee influence, the strongest melee arcane when it comes to general play, triple dips with raw. Yes, the setup is incredibly boring, but you cannot deny just how insanely effective it really was on Rhino. Just like the next arcane on the list, Melee Afflictions. If wave clear isn't your cake, how about damage cap printer? Instead of triple dipping, how about some theoretically infinite dip? If you want to know how melee afflictions work, I had a video for it, but essentially, you slam, you get damage numbers, and they die. Just look at this. My Titron only has 1 mod on it. You would think that this cannot kill steel path enemies at all, but no. Rhino will show you just how broken melee afflictions truly was when it comes to damage. You can't even see the ticks popping out from these trash mobs. And even if you met an overguarded unit, just slam once more and millions of tick for all of a sudden. And lastly, Stomp maxing Rhino. 265 range Rhino Stomp has a radius of 66.25 meters, and none of it are limited by line of sight checks. One press of this button and the world around you will feel incredibly quiet. And the moment that they are free, just chain Rhino Stomp again and they will be in stasis. Rinse and repeat until you finish the mission. All you need to do is just press 1 button or 2 occasionally. This build will absolutely make you snooze through any missions that requires you to hold a point, something like an interception. Rhino is easily the top 3 best frame for interception, if not the best, simply because of Rhino Stomp's absolutely unreal coverage. Rhino can single-handedly cover all 4 points all by his own in vast majority of the tile sets, and turn a generally frustrating mission into something incredibly chill, even sleepy to play around. If you want to help someone to complete an interception mission, Rhino is a top tier pick for that. And not to mention that you are extremely likely to apply the raw buff to every single teammate because it has just as much range as Rhino Stomp. Congrats, you have now reached the end of the guide. Rhino is boring, and he simply does not look flashy. It demands a certain type of boring person to even find enjoyment within such monotonic way of hits, and I would glad to be that person. Rhino is the only frame in this game that you can genuinely consider as omnipotent, especially when subsumes are involved. Not just a jack of all trades. He can basically do everything with flying colors, do every mission with excellent performance, be useful at everything that he is involved in, and just being Rhino. Obviously, I wish that something can be done to make his passive more applicable and make the radial blast part of Rhino Storm more useful, but that is honestly not the point of today's video. Understanding Rhino is a marathon that one will see no finish line. A simple to play frame, yet exceptionally complex when played at the highest level. If you wish to learn more about Rhino, my entire channel can serve this purpose well. Anyways, I will see you all next time. Goodbye.